Be
Labeled a
still
witch in the
now,
Highlands, she healed the
the
warrior and
worst
he
is
married her before the
past.
clan. The
I
Highlands were
am
quiet but not
here.
truly silent. A cold wind swept over the rolling hills, carrying with it the scent of pine and wet earth. Mist curled through the valleys like a living creature, hiding the jagged stones and ancient trees. In the heart of this lonely landscape lay a small, hidden glen. Few dared to enter it, and fewer still spoke of the woman who lived there. They called her a witch. Ilara was her name. She lived alone in a cottage built from stone and timber, almost swallowed by the mist and the wildflowers that grew around it. The villagers feared her. They said she could speak to shadows, call spirits, and curse anyone who crossed her. But they also whispered, quietly, that she had the power to heal wounds that no ordinary doctor could. Some believed her gifts were a blessing. Most believed they were a danger. Ilara herself cared little for their opinions. She spent her days gathering herbs, tending small animals, and walking among the stone circles that dotted the glen. Her black hair, often tangled from the wind, framed a face that seemed both young and wise, as though the years had etched lessons into her eyes. Those eyes, pale and sharp, could see more than people realized. She could see the quiet sorrow in a stranger's heart, or the shadow of a lie on their tongue. It was during the early hours of a rainy morning that the peace of the glen was broken. The sound of hooves clattering over wet stones drew Ilara's attention. At first, she thought it was a hunter, or perhaps a lost traveler. But when a group of men appeared from the mist, carrying a stretcher between them, she realized it was something else entirely. On the stretcher lay a man. He was young, no more than 25, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, and armor dented and streaked with blood. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and his skin was pale under the mud and grime. His hands, even in their weakness, clenched as if ready to fight again. "This is the warrior Kale," said the tallest of the men, his voice rough from fear and exhaustion. "He was found at the edge of the blackthorn forest. The attack, it was unnatural. He won't survive without her." Ilara's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew that name, Kale, though she had never met him. He was a soldier of one of the largest clans in the Highlands, a man expected to lead, expected to fight, expected to survive. Yet now he was lying in her glen, vulnerable and wounded. "You want me to heal him?" she asked quietly, her voice soft but carrying the weight of command. The man nodded. "If anyone can save him, it is you." Ilara stepped closer, her fingers brushing over the stretcher. She could feel the strange energy lingering around him, a shadow that did not belong to the living. It was the mark of a dark spell, a curse laid by an enemy who feared him, or perhaps by forces older and crueler than men. Kale's eyes flickered open, and for the first time he saw her. His gaze was fierce, almost angry, as if he wanted to demand answers. But he had no strength left for words. Ilara lifted her hands, feeling the pulse of life and shadow. Slowly, deliberately, she touched his arm. Heat spread from her fingers, and she whispered words in the old tongue, words that stirred the mist and made the shadows in the glen shift. Pain eased from his body, and color returned to his cheeks, though faintly. Kale gasped and tried to sit up, but his strength was gone. "Where am I?" he asked, voice rough like gravel. "You are in the glen," Ilara replied. "You were badly hurt. It is safe here for now." He studied her, suspicion sharpening his gaze. "The villagers, they call you a witch." "I do not care what the villagers call me," she said, turning back to examine his wounds. "They also call me healer. That is what matters tonight." Kale's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Healer, witch, same thing to them, I suppose." Ilara ignored him. She set to work cleaning the cuts and splints, using herbs and salves that smelled of pine and honey. As she worked, she noticed something unusual about him. The dark spell did not just wound his body, it lingered in his mind. Fear, anger, and determination swirled like storm clouds, and the shadow around him seemed aware, restless. "You feel it too," he said suddenly, his voice softer now, quieter, as if admitting a secret. "I always feel it," she replied, her eyes fixed on his chest. "That is why I do what I do. The land remembers, the shadows remember, and sometimes they touch the living." Kale's gaze softened. He was a warrior trained to hide weakness, yet here he was, reliant on a woman he barely knew. He did not like it, but he could not deny it. And something else tugged at him, something he did not understand, a strange trust or perhaps recognition. Night fell, and the glen was lit by the warm glow of the hearth inside Ilara's cottage. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and the mist rolled thick, hiding the world beyond. Kale slept fitfully, dreams broken by flickers of shadow and fire. Ilara sat nearby, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes never leaving him. She could feel the magic of the land responding to his presence, as if the glen itself was aware of the stranger in its heart. By morning, Kale was awake and weaker, but able to sit with support. He tried to rise fully, but Ilara's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Not yet," she said gently. "You are not ready." Kale's eyes studied her again. He wanted to argue, to demand his freedom, his strength, his pride. But all that anger, all that pride was tempered by a new awareness. She had saved him. And perhaps in this quiet glen, surrounded by mist and stone, there was something more than survival, a fragile understanding, a thread that pulled them toward each other. Over the next days, Ilara tended to him. She prepared meals, applied salves, and whispered charms to protect him from the lingering curse. Kale listened, asked questions, sometimes tested her patience, sometimes admired her skill and quiet strength. Neither spoke of the fear each felt of the dark magic surrounding them. And yet every moment together was a quiet struggle. Kale was proud, a warrior trained to be independent and strong. Ilara was cautious, a woman who had lived alone for years, relying only on herself and the land. Their lives were colliding like two storms meeting in the Highlands, fierce yet beautiful. One evening, as the mist thickened and the wind howled, Kale tried to stand and walk to the door. Ilara stopped him with a firm hand. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low. "Why do you help me?" She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both the firelight and the cold mist outside. "Because you need help. Because the world is cruel and sometimes the shadows are stronger than men. And because it is not just the body that needs healing." Kale frowned, uncertain. He had fought many battles, faced death countless times, but never had he met someone who could see him so clearly, someone who healed more than wounds. A sudden crack of thunder rolled over the glen. The shadows shifted unnaturally, and both of them felt it. The dark force that had wounded him, a force that still lingered. The wind seemed to whisper through the trees, carrying a voice neither of them recognized. Ilara's hands moved instinctively, drawing patterns in the air, muttering old words to keep the shadow at bay. Kale watched, awe and fear mixing in his chest. "What is it?" he asked. "A warning," she said softly. "Not all darkness is gone, and some of it follows you." For the first time, Kale felt the weight of his situation. He had survived battles, rival clans, and betrayal. Yet here, in a small glen with a woman they called a witch, he faced something beyond his understanding, something he could neither fight nor command. The night deepened. Mist wrapped the cottage in a ghostly shroud and the wind moaned through the valley. Kale lay down again, exhaustion overtaking him. Ilara remained awake, watching the shadows, whispering quietly to the land that had chosen her as its guardian. And in that silent, misted glen, something fragile began to grow. A trust, a curiosity, a bond neither fully understood but both felt deeply. The warrior who had fought death now found himself vulnerable in ways he had never imagined. The witch who had lived alone for years now found herself drawn to the man she healed, even as she feared the darkness that clung to him. Somewhere beyond the mist, the Highlands waited, ancient and silent, holding secrets that only time and courage could reveal. And in the heart of the glen, Ilara and Kale began a journey neither had chosen but both were now a part of, a journey of danger, discovery, and the quiet stirring of something far older than themselves. The night passed, and when dawn broke, pale and fragile, a shadow flickered at the edge of the glen. Cale stirred, opening his eyes, and caught the movement. He sat up, a question in his gaze. Alara's hand went to his shoulder. "It has begun," she whispered. Cale's heart tightened. The shadow was close, but so was the woman who had saved him. And in that quiet, terrible, and beautiful moment, he understood that his life, and perhaps his very soul, was no longer his own. The mist rolled in thicker now, hiding the valley, hiding the danger. And yet, for the first time, Cale did not feel fear. He felt something else. Hope. The morning sun was pale, barely breaking through the mist that clung stubbornly to the highland hills. The glen was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. Alara moved about her cottage with careful precision, preparing a weak breakfast for Cale. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows that danced across the stone walls. Cale sat near the window, his dark eyes following the movement of the mist outside. The previous night's events had left him restless. Though his body was healing, a strange unease lingered in his chest. The warrior who had faced countless battles now found himself unsettled by something he could not fight, something he could not understand. "You will need to eat," Alara said gently, setting a bowl of warm broth before him. Her hands were steady, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. "Your body cannot heal without strength." Cale stared at the broth but did not move. Instead, he studied her, noting the careful way she moved, the quiet power in her gestures. You did not have to save me," he said finally. "The villagers, they fear you. They would not forgive you for helping me." Alara's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "I care little for what villagers think. I care for life and for those in need." Her voice was soft, yet every word carried a weight that settled deep in his chest. Cale considered her words. He had been raised to value strength, honor, and loyalty to his clan. Yet here in a small glen surrounded by mist, he felt something entirely new: vulnerability. And with it, a strange curiosity. As he ate, Alara tended to the remaining bruises and cuts. Her hands moved over him with a careful grace, her fingers brushing against his skin in ways that made his heart skip, though he did not understand why. The herbs she applied smelled of pine, honey, and a faint trace of something wild, something that seemed to belong to the land itself. "You are different," Cale said after a long silence. "Stronger than anyone I have met, and yet alone." Alara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Being alone is not weakness," she said softly. "It is protection. The world can be cruel and the shadows are patient." Cale's gaze darkened. "Shadows?" Alara's eyes flicked toward the mist outside. "There are forces older than men, older than clans. They linger in the Highlands, waiting for those who are careless or proud. You carry a mark of them now." Cale swallowed hard, recalling the strange pain that had coursed through him during the attack in the forest. It was unlike any wound he had suffered in battle. This was different. It had lingered in his bones, in his mind, in the space between life and death. "I have fought many enemies," he said quietly. "None like this." Alara knelt beside him, placing her hands lightly on his shoulders. "This is not an enemy you can strike with sword or shield. This is a shadow of magic, older than men, and it watches. You cannot fight it alone." Cale met her eyes, and for the first time, he did not feel the need to hide behind pride or courage. "Then I will not fight it alone," he said. His voice was low, steady, carrying a weight that surprised even him. Alara nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Trust was difficult, even for her. She had lived long enough to know that love and power carried danger. And yet, there was something about this warrior that stirred her, something that made her want to reach beyond caution. Days passed. Cale's strength slowly returned, though he was careful to follow her instructions. They spoke little, but when they did, it was in quiet, meaningful words. He learned to trust her skill and wisdom, and she learned to trust his presence, not as a soldier or a threat, but as a man. One afternoon, as the sun filtered weakly through the mist, Cale ventured toward the stone circle that lay at the center of the glen. The ancient stones rose like silent sentinels, worn by centuries of wind and rain. Ilara followed him, her steps careful, her hands clutching a small bundle of herbs. "Why do these stones exist?" Cale asked, his voice low. "Why are they here?" "They mark the place where the land remembers," Ilara said. "The Highlands are alive in ways most cannot see. The stones are a connection between the living, the spirits, and the shadows that linger. They are old, patient, and sometimes protective." Cale stepped closer to the tallest stone, his fingers brushing against its rough surface. He could feel a hum, a vibration that made the hair on his arms stand. "It feels alive," he whispered. Ilara watched him carefully. "It is, and so are you now. The shadow that followed you, it is not gone. It watches, it waits. You are bound to it, even if you do not yet understand how." Cale's chest tightened. He had faced death before, but this was different. The battle was not against men or beasts, but against something that belonged neither to life nor death. And yet, standing beside Ilara, he felt a strength he had not known he possessed. Night fell, and the glen was bathed in silver light from the moon. Cale lay near the fire, restless. The shadows outside shifted unnaturally, and he could feel them pressing closer, testing the boundaries Ilara had drawn. He turned to her, watching as she moved quietly, tending to the herbs and charms that kept the dark forces at bay. "You seem afraid," he said softly. Ilara froze, her hands pausing mid-motion. She met his gaze, and for a moment the mask of calm she always wore faltered. "I am not afraid of you," she said finally, her voice steady again. "But there are things I cannot control, things older than me, older than any clan." Cale reached out, hesitating, then placed a hand over hers. "Then we will face them together," he said. His words carried a promise he did not fully understand, yet it was enough to make her heart beat faster. The days grew colder, and the shadow of the curse seemed to stir with every misty morning. Strange movements at the edge of the glen, whispers that no one spoke aloud, and the feeling of being watched, all reminded them that danger was near. One evening, as the wind howled and the mist thickened, Cale walked near the stone circle again. He sensed something moving in the shadows, something that did not belong. Ilara followed, her eyes alert. A sudden gust of wind swept through the stones, and Cale felt a sharp pressure in his chest. The shadow had returned, stronger, more insistent. He stumbled, caught between fear and instinct. Ilara moved quickly, chanting in the old tongue. Her hands glowed faintly, and the shadow recoiled, hissing like a living thing. Cale watched, awe and fear mingling in his chest. What is that?" he asked. "A warning," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "The shadow grows stronger, it remembers you. And it will not rest until it has tested you fully." Cale felt a surge of determination. "Then I will not run, I will face it." Ilara looked at him, a mixture of admiration and concern in her eyes. "You must trust me," she said softly, "and you must trust yourself. Only together can we survive this." The night passed slowly. The wind battered the cottage, and the mist thickened so much that the glen seemed to disappear entirely. Cale lay awake, thinking of the battles he had fought and the power that now surrounded him. He realized that the strongest force he had ever faced was not a man, a beast, or even a weapon. It was the unknown, the unseen, and the heart itself. Ilara watched him sleep, her hands resting near the charms she had laid around the cottage. She knew the shadow was patient, that it would return with greater force. And yet, something had shifted. The warrior who had once relied only on steel and strength was beginning to rely on her. And she, who had always lived alone, found herself drawn to him in ways she had never expected. The bond between them grew quietly, like a flame sheltered from the wind. It was not yet love, not yet trust fully formed, but it was something powerful, a connection that neither could ignore. As dawn approached, a pale light filtered through the mist. Kale stirred, opening his eyes, and noticed movement at the edge of the glen. A shadow flickered, watching, waiting. Alara placed a hand on his shoulder. "It has begun," she whispered. Kale's heart tightened. The danger was real, but so was the woman who had saved him. And in that moment, he knew that his life, his strength, and perhaps his heart were no longer his own. The shadow lingered in the mist, silent, patient, and watchful. And in the heart of the glen, Kale and Alara prepared for what was to come, together. The morning sun broke weakly through the mist, casting the highlands in pale gold. The glen, once a haven of quiet and whispered magic, now felt smaller, crowded with the weight of secrets and expectation. Kale rose from the straw bed in Alara's cottage, stretching his limbs carefully. Though the shadow in the glen had been held at bay during the night, the unease remained, pressing against him like a tide he could not control. Alara was already awake, moving silently around the cottage. Her hands carefully arranged herbs, dried roots, and small charms in neat rows on the wooden table. Every movement was deliberate, precise, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. Kale noticed it immediately. "You are tense," he said, his voice low, but edged with curiosity. Alara paused and met his gaze. "I have not seen this shadow so restless for many years," she said softly. "It knows you, Kale. It remembers." Kale clenched his fists. He had faced countless enemies in battle, yet none had left him with this gnawing fear. This shadow was unlike steel or fire. It was patient, waiting for the moment to strike. And now the danger was no longer hidden. "I am not afraid," he said, though even to his own ears the words rang hollow. "I will face it, but I will not do it alone." Alara nodded, the corner of her lips tugging into a faint, almost unnoticeable smile. "Then we must prepare, not only for the shadow but for the world that will see you here with me." Kale frowned, puzzled. "The world," Alara's eyes softened. "Your clan will hear. Others will know, and when they do, they will not all understand. Some will fear, some will judge, some may even try to harm us for it." The words settled heavily in the room, but Kale did not flinch. He had long learned to carry the weight of expectation and duty. Yet this was different. He was beginning to see that the bond forming between him and Alara carried consequences far beyond the glen. By midday, the mist had begun to thin, and the sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance. Kale's heart tightened. A small group of his clan warriors appeared, their faces a mix of concern and suspicion. At the lead was Darren, his closest friend and advisor, his gaze fixed on the cottage with suspicion and unease. "Kale," Darren called, his voice carrying across the glen. "You are well." Kale stood tall, though his body still bore the marks of his injuries. "I am," he replied, his tone steady, "and I am under care." Darren's eyes flicked to Alara, lingering just a moment too long. His jaw tightened. "The healer?" he asked. "The woman they speak of as a witch?" Alara remained silent, her hands folded in front of her. She had anticipated this confrontation. She had expected judgment, suspicion, and perhaps even anger. But she did not shrink. She had survived the Highlands long enough to know that power demanded courage. Kale's gaze hardened. "She saved my life," he said firmly, "and if any harm comes to her while I live, you will answer to me." The warriors exchanged uneasy glances, and for a moment silence fell over the glen. The mist seemed to thicken, as if the land itself held its breath. Darren finally spoke, his voice quieter now but edged with concern. "The clan will want to see you, Kale. They will want answers, and they will want her examined." Kale's jaw tightened. "I do not care what they want. I will not leave her vulnerable. Not now, not ever." Alara stepped forward, her pale eyes meeting Darren's. "I am no threat to your clan," she said softly, but every word carried the weight of power and command. "But I will not hide. I will not bend to fear or superstition. If your clan wishes to judge me, let them do so knowing the truth." Darren's hand twitched near the hilt of his sword, but he did not move further. He understood, as all warriors eventually did, that strength could not always be measured by steel. Sometimes it was held in the calm presence of one who wielded power unseen. Cale's chest swelled with pride and frustration. He wanted to shield her, to defend her from judgment and fear. Yet he also knew that the path they were walking demanded courage, not only from her but from him as well. That evening, they set out for the clan's stronghold. The wind was sharper here, the mist thinner, revealing jagged hills and the dark silhouette of the fort's walls. Torches flickered along the battlements, signaling both life and suspicion. Cale felt every eye upon him, every whisper carried across the courtyard like an accusation. Alara walked beside him, quiet and poised, her presence commanding attention despite her small frame. She did not fear the clan, nor the judgment that would surely come. She had faced much in her life, loneliness, suspicion, fear, and survived. But this, standing before a clan whose traditions were steeped in honor, blood, and superstition, was a new test. As they entered the great hall, the murmurs grew louder. Clan elders, warriors, and even distant allies turned their gaze upon them. The air was thick with tension, every breath carrying the weight of expectation. Cale led Alara forward, his hand brushing against hers in a silent promise of protection and solidarity. The clan chief, a tall man with hair silvered by age and eyes sharp as the Highland wind, rose to greet them. His gaze flicked between Cale and Alara, suspicion and curiosity mingling in his expression. "Cale," the chief said, his voice steady but firm, "you have returned, and yet you bring with you one the clan fears. Tell us why this woman is here." Cale squared his shoulders. "She saved my life, she healed me when none could, and she remains here because I trust her. That is all the reason needed." A murmur ran through the hall. Some whispered approval, others disbelief. The chief's gaze narrowed. "Trust is not enough to protect the clan from shadows, and this woman, she is no ordinary healer. Her power is known to all. Some say it is dangerous, some say cursed." Alara stepped forward, her voice calm but clear. "I do not seek the clan's favor. I seek no glory, no reward. I only ask that my actions be judged fairly. I heal when life demands it, and I protect when it is possible. Nothing more." A tense silence followed her words. Cale felt the eyes of the clan on him, waiting for him to speak, to defend, to act. And yet in that silence he realized something. Fear could be faced, suspicion could be challenged, but courage, the courage to stand beside the one you trust, was far rarer. He took a deep breath. "I ask you all to witness this," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "I will not hide her, nor will I allow fear or prejudice to rule my judgment. Alara has saved me, and I choose her, not as a witch, not as a healer, but as the one who stands with me." The hall fell silent. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Some warriors shifted uneasily, others clenched their fists, but none spoke against him. The chief's eyes remained on Cale, and after a long moment he finally nodded. "Then it is settled for now," the chief said. "But know this, Cale, the world does not easily forgive bonds that defy tradition. You and this woman will face trials, both within the clan and beyond." Cale's hand brushed against Alara's, a small but steady reassurance. "We will face them together," he said softly. Night fell over the stronghold, and the glen's shadow seemed far away, but not gone. Alara and Cale shared a quiet meal in the hall, their conversation muted but meaningful. Every glance, every word, carried the weight of what they had chosen, each other. And yet they knew that danger lingered, not just in the shadow outside, but in the hearts of those who feared what they could not understand. Later, as the stronghold slept, Cale stood on the battlements, looking out over the Highlands. The moon cast silver light on the hills, and the mist swirled like a living sea. He felt the pull of the shadow again, a reminder that the dangers they faced were far from over. Alara joined him, her presence quiet but firm. She did not speak, only stood beside him, her hand brushing against his. He felt a strange calm in her presence, as though the world's storms could not touch them while they were together. "Kale," she said finally, her voice soft, "the shadow will not wait. It grows stronger and it watches. We must be ready, not just for what is coming but for what we will face in each other." Kale turned to her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I am ready," he said, though even he felt the uncertainty behind the words. "I do not know what comes, but I will not run. Not from the shadow, not from the clan, not from you." Ilara's eyes softened, and for the first time she allowed a faint smile. "Then we face it together," she whispered. A sudden movement at the edge of the battlements caught their attention. The shadow flickered, almost playful, almost threatening. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whisper that neither of them could understand. Kale tightened his grip on the railing and Ilara reached for her charms. The mist seemed to close in, swirling thicker, closer, as though the land itself was aware of their choice, aware of their bond. And in that moment, they understood something neither had said aloud. Their lives, their hearts, and their fates were intertwined. The clan's fires and the shadow's watchful eyes were no longer separate threats. They had chosen each other, and that choice would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. The wind howled, carrying with it the echo of distant voices, the stirrings of magic, and the promise of trials yet to come. And in the stronghold's quiet night, Kale and Ilara stood together, ready to face whatever darkness awaited them, bound by trust, courage, and the fragile stirrings of something deeper than either had known. The Highlands were restless that night. Mist rolled over the hills like a restless sea, hiding the jagged stones and winding paths that led into unknown valleys. The wind carried the scent of wet pine and the faint tang of distant smoke, as if the land itself were whispering warnings. Kale and Ilara stood at the edge of the glen, their hands clasped, hearts beating in unison. The shadow that had haunted Kale since the forest attack had grown bolder, more persistent, and now threatened to emerge fully. "You can feel it too," Kale said, his voice low, almost a whisper. His dark eyes scanned the swirling mist, searching for any movement, any sign of the unseen force. Ilara nodded, her pale eyes steady but filled with concern. "It waits for the perfect moment. It knows fear and it feeds on doubt. We cannot give it either." Kale swallowed, a knot of tension tightening in his chest. "Then we face it together," he said. His grip on her hand tightened, a silent promise of protection and unity. The night deepened. The mist thickened, curling around the stone circle in the heart of the glen. It was here that Ilara had chosen to confront the shadow fully, drawing on the old magic she had learned from the land itself. The stones hummed faintly, as if recognizing the power that was being summoned. Kale followed her steps closely, aware that his life, and theirs, depended on trust and courage. Ilara knelt among the stones, her hands moving in deliberate patterns, tracing symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Kale watched, awe and fear mingling in his chest. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the land itself was holding its breath. "You must stay close," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "If the shadow reaches you, it will feed on your fear. Stand firm, trust me." Kale nodded, his jaw tight. He had faced countless battles, but nothing had tested him like this. His sword was useless here. Only courage, trust, and the bond between him and Ilara could shield him. The shadow appeared first as a ripple in the mist, then as a darker shape, twisting and coiling like smoke. It seemed alive, aware, patient. Its presence was suffocating, a weight pressing against the mind and heart. Kale felt his chest tighten, his pulse quicken. "Do not falter," Ilara whispered, her hands glowing brighter as the magic of the stones responded to her command. "You are stronger than it believes. You are not alone." The shadow surged forward, reaching for Kale, and he felt a wave of icy fear. Instinctively, he took a step back, but Ilara's voice cut through the panic. "Hold my hand," she commanded. He grasped her hand, and the warmth of her presence steadied him. A calm settled over him, faint but undeniable. The shadow recoiled slightly, hissing, but did not vanish. It circled them like a predator testing its prey. Alara rose, standing between Kale and the shadow, her figure small but unyielding against the dark force. "You have no hold here," she cried, her voice echoing across the misted glen. Symbols of light traced her arms, hands, and chest, glowing brighter with every word. "We are bound by more than fear. We are bound by trust, by courage, and by what we choose to protect." The shadow shrieked, a sound that rattled the bones and froze the heart. It surged forward again, faster this time, intent on consuming the bond between them. Kale felt panic rise, but Alara's hand on his chest calmed him, grounding him in a way he could not explain. "You must fight it, Kale," she said softly. "Not with your sword, fight it with your heart, with your will." He closed his eyes, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed. He thought of the glen, the stone circles, the wind, and the life he wanted to protect, not just his own, but hers as well. Slowly, a warmth began to flow through him, a light that pushed against the cold grip of the shadow. The shadow hissed again, writhing, but the warmth spread, stronger, steadier. Alara's magic intertwined with his courage, creating a bond that the darkness could not sever. Together they pushed the shadow back, step by step, until it shrieked and vanished into the mist, leaving only silence and the faint scent of wet earth. Kale sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. Alara knelt beside him, placing her hand on his cheek. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it together." Kale looked at her, a mixture of relief, admiration, and something deeper flooding his chest. "I could not have done it without you," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You saved me again, not just my life, but everything." Alara's eyes softened, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax fully. "And you saved me," she said. "You trusted me when fear tried to take hold. That is far stronger than any magic I know." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the calm return to the glen. The mist had begun to lift slightly, and the first hints of dawn painted the hills with pale light. The stones hummed faintly, as if acknowledging the courage and bond that had protected them. But even as the danger receded, they knew it was not gone entirely. The Highlands were ancient, patient, and full of secrets. Shadows waited for the careless, and the bond they shared would continue to be tested. Yet in this moment they allowed themselves a fragile peace. The journey back to the clan's stronghold was quiet, the wind gentler, the mist lighter. Kale walked beside Alara, his hand brushing hers, a comfort and a promise. The clan would see him, healed and strong, and they would have to accept the woman who had stood beside him against forces they could not understand. When they arrived, the stronghold was alive with activity. Warriors moved along the battlements and villagers gathered to see the healed warrior. Darren approached them, his expression softened by relief and admiration. "You faced the shadow and survived," he said, his voice filled with awe. "And you stood with her." Kale nodded, his gaze steady. "I did, and I would do it again. She is no threat. She is my strength, my guide, and my choice." Alara stepped forward, her posture calm but proud. "I ask only to serve, to protect, and to heal," she said. "I ask for no reward, only acceptance of what is true." The clan chief, standing at the center of the courtyard, regarded them both carefully. His eyes, sharp and discerning, softened slightly as he took in the bond between the warrior and the woman who had saved him. "Then it is clear," he said finally. "You have faced darkness together. You have proven courage and loyalty beyond words. The clan will accept what is, even if tradition does not yet fully understand." A murmur of approval spread through the crowd, some reluctant, some curious, but none willing to deny the truth. Kale felt a surge of relief and pride. For the first time, he realized that courage was not only about facing enemies. It was about standing by those you trust, even when the world opposes you. Night fell again, and the stronghold was quiet. Kale and Alara stood at the edge of the courtyard, gazing at the misted hills beyond. The danger of the shadow was not gone, but they had faced it together and emerged stronger. Their bond had been tested, forged in fire and fear, and now it was unbreakable. Alara reached for Kale's hand, their fingers intertwining. "We have survived much," she said softly, "but the Highlands are patient. Shadows remain and challenges will come." Kale smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Then we face them together, always." The wind swept across the Highlands, carrying the faint scent of pine and the promise of new beginnings. The mist lingered, swirling gently around the stones, but it no longer felt threatening. Instead, it seemed to honor the courage, trust, and love that had protected the glen and its inhabitants. Alara rested her head on Kale's shoulder, and he held her close. For the first time, both of them allowed themselves to feel the fullness of their bond, a bond that had been tested by shadow, fear, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, brighter, and unshakable. The Highlands would continue to whisper of shadows and dangers, but Kale and Alara had discovered something far older, more enduring, and infinitely more powerful: the courage to face darkness together, and the love that grew from trust, sacrifice, and shared strength. As dawn broke fully, painting the hills with gold and silver, a faint mist drifted across the glen. And somewhere in that mist, a distant voice whispered Kale's name, not in threat, but in acknowledgement, as though the land itself had witnessed the bond that would endure beyond shadow and time. Kale tightened his hand around Alara's. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." Alara smiled, her eyes reflecting the rising sun. "Together," she agreed. And so in the Highlands, under the watchful stones and the ever-shifting mist, their story continued, not as a tale of fear or superstition, but as a legend of courage, redemption, and the enduring power of love forged in shadow.